My mother abandoned my father when he needed her most. Rachel said it across a rehab conference table, with my husband in a wheelchair and my son staring at me in disbelief. Thomas had fractured his hip on May 3rd. Since then, I had managed his meals, medication, bathing, exercises, and every trip to the clinic. But Rachel told the care team that his slow recovery came from my neglect. Mark pushed his chair back. "Mom, tell me she's wrong." I had slept beside Thomas, setting alarms for his pain medicine. Instead of listing those nights, I asked Rachel to open the care app she controlled. She turned the tablet toward us. 63 home care visits appeared in green, 3 visits a day for 21 days. Each one was marked completed. Each one carried Thomas's digital signature. Harbor Way had already billed $8,820 for the work. Rachel tapped the screen. The records don't lie. She was right about one thing. They didn't. Because the first visit I opened was time-stamped while Thomas and I were checking in at his rehabilitation clinic across town. No aide had been inside our home that morning. Thomas looked at the signature and whispered, "Eleanor, I never signed that." The room went quiet, but it was not the kind of quiet that clears a person's name. Mark stared at the tablet. Rachel folded her arms. The rehabilitation nurse looked toward the clinic administrator as if she wanted someone else to decide whether the meeting should continue. I asked Rachel to let me see the entry again. "Dad is confused," she said. "He's been on pain medication for weeks." Thomas raised his head. "I know my own signature." Rachel did not answer him. She looked at me instead. "You're doing this because you don't want to admit you couldn't handle his care. If you have ever done the work no one notices, take a second to like this video. You will understand why I refuse to leave that accusation unanswered." That sentence hurt more than the first accusation. Rachel knew exactly what I had handled. She had seen the clean bandages in the bathroom trash and the medication chart taped inside the kitchen cabinet. She had eaten soup from the same pot I used to prepare Thomas's low-sodium meals. Yet she said it calmly, as if my work had disappeared because she had chosen not to count it. I took out the appointment card from my purse and placed it beside the tablet. The clinic check-in time matched the supposed home visit almost to the minute. The administrator asked Rachel whether a visit could be closed after the fact. "Of course," Rachel said. "The aide may have entered the time incorrectly." "Which aide?" I asked. Rachel glanced down. "I would have to check the employee schedule. The visit says verified." "It means the paperwork was verified." "By whom?" Her mouth tightened. For the first time since she had accused me, she did not have a complete answer ready. The clinic administrator ended the conference 10 minutes early. She said Thomas's recovery plan would be reviewed separately from the billing question and that Harbor Way should be contacted. Rachel warned us not to turn a scheduling mistake into a family war. Mark followed her into the hall. I remained beside Thomas. He kept looking at the copied signature on the screen until Rachel returned for her tablet. "I want access to my own account," he told her. "I'll reset it when I get home." "Now." Rachel slipped the tablet into her bag. "Dad, you're upset. We'll talk when everyone is calmer." Then she left. Thomas watched the door close. She never asked me to sign anything after I came home. I knew that. I had been present for every paper placed in front of him. But hearing him say it changed the problem. Until then, I had been trying to defend the care I gave. Now we were looking at records for care no one had given at all. On the drive home, Mark called twice. I let the first call go to voicemail because Thomas was exhausted. When Mark called again, I put him on speaker. "Rachel says the app uses placeholder times," he said. "She says Mom is treating them like clock-in records." "Ask her why a placeholder has Dad's signature," I said. She said he probably signed on paper and the aide uploaded it later. Thomas leaned toward the phone. "I did not," Mark exhaled. "Dad, I'm trying to understand. Rachel handles this for a living. Mom doesn't." I gripped the steering wheel, but kept my voice level. "Then understanding it should be easy. Ask for the name of one aide who entered our house." Mark had no answer. Neither did Rachel, though it would take several days for him to notice. After Thomas's fall, our lives had narrowed quickly. On May 3rd, he had gone into the garage of our Columbus home to bring in a folding chair before the rain. I heard the chair hit the concrete, then his shoulder, then a sound I had never heard from him in 46 years of marriage. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was pale and shaking. The fracture required surgery, followed by days in the hospital and a long recovery at home. Rachel came to the hospital the morning after surgery carrying coffee and a yellow legal pad. She worked as a scheduling coordinator for Harbor Way Home Support, and she said she could arrange everything faster than the hospital discharge office. "Let me take one thing off your plate," she told me. I was tired enough to be grateful. Rachel created Thomas's online care account and made herself the administrator on May 8th. She said the role would let her coordinate aides, approve schedule changes, and speak to Harborway without forcing Thomas to remember passwords while he was taking pain medication. I asked for a second login. The system gets messy with two administrators, she said. Just text me if you need anything. At the time, it sounded practical. Rachel had always been decisive. Her certainty was useful until someone disagreed with her. Then it became control. Thomas came home with a walker, a stack of instructions, and strict limits on how much weight he could place on his left leg. Rachel said Harborway would send someone 3 times a day for 3 weeks. Morning visits would cover bathing and medication. Afternoon visits would help with exercises. Evening visits would prepare him safely for bed. On the first morning, no one came. I called Rachel at 9:15. She said the aide was running late and told me to help Thomas wash so he would not miss his first exercise session. No one came that afternoon either. Rachel blamed an emergency at another client's home. By evening, Thomas was too uncomfortable to wait. I helped him change, checked his incision, and settled him into bed. Tomorrow will be better, Rachel promised. It was not. During the next several days, Rachel always had an explanation. One aide had a sick child. Another had car trouble. A third had supposedly gone to the wrong address. She spoke about these people as though I should know their names, but I never saw a Harborway badge, a uniform, or a car in our driveway. I filled the gaps because Thomas could not wait for an explanation before using the bathroom. At 67, I could still support his weight, though each transfer left my back aching. I was his wife. I loved him. None of that felt heroic while I was doing it. It felt necessary. Rachel stopped by twice that first week. Each time, she looked through the medication bottles and asked whether I had completed the mobility exercises. She never asked whether an aide had arrived. When I told her no one had, she said she would straighten it out at work. I believed she had. The Care app sent notices to Thomas's email, but Rachel had changed the notification settings to a weekly summary. Thomas rarely used email on his phone, and I did not have the password. Once a week, a message arrived saying his care plan was on schedule. We assumed that meant the future schedule, not visits already marked complete. By the end of the second week, I stopped asking when help would come. That was my mistake. I did not stop because the question had been answered. I stopped because asking Rachel led to the same conversation, and I had no energy left for it. Thomas noticed. "You shouldn't have to do all of this," he said one night as I helped him lower himself onto the edge of the bed. "It's temporary. That doesn't make it light." I told him what I had told our children for years. We were fine. We would manage. There was no point worrying everyone. Silence kept the evening peaceful. It also gave Rachel room to tell a different story. The morning after the rehabilitation conference, I began reconstructing those 3 weeks. I used the wall calendar, grocery receipts, Thomas's discharge papers, pharmacy texts, and the small notebook where I had recorded his temperature and medication. I was not trying to build a case. I was trying to reassure myself that I had not misunderstood what happened. I had not. On the second supposed day of service, I had taken Thomas back to the orthopedic clinic because his incision looked swollen. We were gone from 8:30 until afternoon. The app later showed a morning visit completed at our home. On the final Monday, Thomas spent most of the afternoon at outpatient imaging. A mobility aide supposedly exercised with him in our living room during that same period. I wrote each conflict on an index card and arranged the cards across our dining table. Thomas watched from his chair. "You used to do that with Christmas lists. Christmas lists didn't sign your name." He asked to see the signatures again. We still could not access the portal, but I had taken screenshots during the conference. I enlarged one on my laptop. Thomas studied it for nearly a minute. "I know where that came from," he said. 2 years earlier, in 2024, Thomas had signed a consent form allowing Harborway to provide short-term transportation after a minor eye procedure. Rachel had helped arrange that service too. The signature on the form had an unusual break in the final letter because the pen had caught on the clipboard. The digital signatures in the Care app had the same break. We found Thomas's copy of the old consent form in the filing cabinet. I placed it beside the screenshot. The signatures were not merely similar. The spacing, the angle, and the tiny interruption in the final stroke were identical. "A person doesn't sign exactly the same way 63 times, Thomas said. He was right. His current signature had changed slightly after surgery because his hand trembled when he was tired. Yet every digital form carried a perfect copy of the older one. I called Rachel. She answered on the 4th ring. Is Dad all right? We found the signature Harborway used. There was a pause. What do you mean found it? It was copied from his 2024 consent form. Rachel recovered quickly. The company keeps authorized signatures. That's normal. For consent, perhaps. Not to certify a visit. Mom, you don't understand electronic records. Then explain them to me. I'm at work. Tell me the name of one aide. I can't discuss employee information. Not even with the patient? She lowered her voice. Stop digging through Dad's papers and frightening him. I am trying to fix this. Fix what? The line went dead. Thomas had heard the whole conversation. He looked less surprised than I expected. She knew about the form, he said. I wanted to defend Rachel. The impulse rose before I could stop it. Maybe Harborway really did store signatures. Maybe an automated system had applied the old image. Maybe she was protecting confidential employee records. Then I remembered the conference table and the ease with which our daughter had blamed me in front of strangers. I called Harborway's general number. The receptionist found Thomas's account but said only an authorized administrator could discuss service details. Thomas is the client, I said. His daughter is listed as the primary portal administrator in Family Contact. Can he remove her? He can submit a signed authorization request. The receptionist emailed the form. Thomas signed it slowly at the kitchen table, and I drove it to Harborway's regional office that afternoon. I asked for a stamped copy. The receptionist seemed surprised, but she stamped it. Rachel called before I reached home. You went over my head at my own job? Thomas asked for access to his own records. Do you have any idea how this makes me look? No, I said, but I know how you made me look. She went silent. For once, I did not rush to fill the silence for her. That evening, Harborway sent a temporary link to Thomas's email. The link allowed him to view and export his records for 24 hours while the administrator change was reviewed. I opened the portal at our dining table. Thomas sat beside me. We went through all 63 entries one by one. The descriptions were brief and repetitive. Client assisted with medication. Client completed prescribed mobility exercise. Client showed no change in condition. Each visit lasted exactly 1 hour. Each had been billed at $140. The language varied just enough to appear written by different people, but the mistakes repeated. Thomas's middle initial was missing from every form. The evening notes always used the same phrase about his comfort, even on the night we had gone to urgent care, because his pain became severe. At the bottom of each entry was a technical section I had not noticed on Rachel's tablet. It listed the submission time, verification status, and an alphanumeric device code. The code was the same on every visit. I did not know what the code identified. It could have belonged to the branch office, the portal, or the software itself. But 63 supposedly separate visits, performed at different times by different aides, had all been submitted from one device. Thomas pointed at the export button. Save it before you ask her. That was not how he usually spoke about Rachel. Hearing caution in his voice told me he was more frightened than angry. I exported the full record as a spreadsheet in a document file. A confirmation message appeared at the top of the screen. I saved both copies to my laptop, copied them to a small flash drive, and emailed the spreadsheet to myself. Then I took screenshots of the technical fields. Only after the copies were safe did I call Rachel. What does device code HWC17 identify? I asked. She did not ask where I had seen it. It's an internal code. For what? You shouldn't be looking at that section. All 63 visits have the same code. I heard a door close on her end of the call. When she spoke again, her voice was low and controlled. Mom, listen to me. Some records were batch processed because the branch was short-staffed. It does not mean the care was fraudulent. Who provided the care? That is being corrected. Who entered our house? You're making this much worse than it needs to be. For whom? She hung up again. The next morning, Mark arrived without calling. He stood on the porch with his hands in his coat pockets, though the day was warm. Rachel says you're threatening her job over a computer error. I let him in and led him to the dining table. The index cards were still arranged by date. He glanced at them and shook his head. This looks like a trial. It is a calendar. She says you've resented her since Dad's fall because she took charge. Did she tell you she took control of the portal before any aid came? She told me you refused help. Thomas was in the living room, close enough to hear us. He called Mark's name. Mark went to him. Dad, did Mom refuse the aids? No aid came. Not once? Not once. Mark looked back at me. Doubt passed across his face, but it did not settle there. He took out his phone and played a voicemail. My own voice filled the room. I cannot keep doing this alone. I will not cover another missing shift and pretend your schedule is working." The recording stopped. Mark said, "Rachel sent me that yesterday." I remembered the message. I had left it after 3 nights of almost no sleep. But there had been more. I opened my phone and found the original voicemail in my sent messages. Mine continued after the point where Rachel's copy ended. "If Harbor Way cannot send anyone tomorrow, tell me now. I will arrange help through the clinic. Thomas cannot be left waiting for people who never arrive." I played the full message for Mark. He sat down slowly. She cut it. She cut away the part that explained it. Mark rubbed both hands over his face. Why would she do that? I had been asking the same question, but I no longer believed a scheduling error could answer it. Rachel had not merely entered bad information. She had begun distributing evidence against me before anyone outside the family had accused her of anything. Mark asked me to send him both versions of the voicemail. I did. Then he asked for the exported records. "Those belong to Dad," I said. "Ask him." Thomas gave permission. It mattered to me that we did not copy Rachel's habit of making decisions for him simply because he was injured. Mark read the first several entries at the dining table. He compared the visit times to the index cards and then to the calendar on his phone. On the day of the urgent care trip, he had texted me from the parking lot. The message was time-stamped 6 minutes before a Harbor Way aide supposedly began an evening visit at our empty house. "Maybe they log services remotely," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Bathing support cannot be done remotely," Thomas said. Mark scrolled through the file. "There should be caregiver names." There were none in the version available to us. Every entry had a visit number, task list, signature image, billing amount, and device code. The space where an employee identifier should have appeared contained only a dash. Mark called Rachel from our kitchen. She answered, but he did not put her on speaker. "Who were the aides?" he asked. I could hear the sharp rise of her voice without making out the words. "I am not attacking you," Mark said. "I am asking for one name." He listened for nearly a minute. "No, I have not chosen Mom's side. Dad says no one came." Another pause. "Then send me the staffing schedule." Rachel ended the call. Mark stared at the dark screen. "She said the names were removed because of employee privacy." "Did she say why she edited my voicemail?" "She said she sent the relevant part." That answer did something the records had not. Mark finally looked angry. He spent the rest of the afternoon helping me compare our phone logs with the service dates. If Harbor Way had tried to send an aide, someone should have called to confirm access, report a delay, or ask where to park. There were no such calls, no texts, no emails with caregiver names. Our doorbell camera stored only 30 days of recordings, but the remaining days showed no Harbor Way visitor. Rachel had promised help repeatedly, yet she had never once given us the name of the person who was coming. At 4 that afternoon, a regional compliance manager from Harbor Way called Thomas. His request to change the portal administrator had triggered a review because it mentioned disputed services. Thomas gave permission for me to stay on the line. The manager asked simple questions. Had an aide entered our home between May 9th and May 29th? Had Thomas received 3 daily visits? Had he signed electronic completion forms? Had anyone explained charges totaling $8,820? Thomas answered no each time. When the manager asked whether a family member might have provided the listed tasks, Thomas said, "My wife did almost all of them." I corrected him. "I did what a spouse does in an emergency. I did not work for Harbor Way, and I did not authorize anyone to bill for it." The manager said the account would be restricted while the company preserved the records. She asked us not to contact any listed staff members directly. "There are no staff members listed," I said. She paused. "That is one of the issues we are reviewing." It was the first confirmation from outside our family that the blank employee fields were not normal. Rachel called within 20 minutes. "You reported me to compliance." Thomas answered their questions. "Do you know what happens when a branch gets flagged?" "Everyone suffers. People who have nothing to do with Dad's account could lose work." "Then help them find the correct records." "There are procedures you don't understand." "I understand that no one came." She began crying. Rachel's tears had always undone me. When she was 8 and broke a neighbor's window, I paid for it before asking why she had thrown the stone. When she was 16 and lied about where she had been, I told Thomas not to punish her until we understood what pressure she was under. Even at 41, she knew how quickly I moved from anger to rescue. "My entire career is at risk," she said. I closed my eyes. "Did you create those visits?" Her crying stopped as suddenly as it began. "I have to go." That night, Thomas barely ate. He pushed mashed potatoes around his plate and watched the back door. though no one was expected. "There is something I should have told you," he said. On the third day after he came home, his phone had displayed a notice saying a Harborway visit was complete. He had asked Rachel about it while I was in the pharmacy. She told him the company used preliminary entries to reserve staff hours and that the notices would correct themselves when the aides caught up. 2 days later, another summary said 6 visits had been completed. Thomas asked again. This time, Rachel told him the entries were insurance placeholders and warned that questioning them might cause Harborway to cancel the remaining care. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "You were already exhausted, and I knew what you would do." "What would I do?" "You would confront her. She would say you never trusted her. Mark would get pulled in. The grandchildren would hear about it. I thought if I kept quiet, she would straighten it out before anyone was hurt." He looked toward the walker beside his chair. "I also did not want everyone deciding I was too confused to understand a phone notification." That was when I understood how Rachel's authority had worked. She had not needed to threaten either of us directly. She had used the things we feared. I feared losing our daughter. Thomas feared becoming a burden and dividing the family. Between those fears, we had created a protected space around her decisions. "I am sorry," he said. "So ennui." Neither apology fixed the records. Both mattered. We agreed that evening that there would be no more private bargains with Rachel. If she called about Thomas's care, we would both listen. If Harborway asked a question, we would answer it plainly. We would not exaggerate what she had done, and we would not reduce it to keep the peace. The next morning, the portal was empty. Thomas's login still worked, but the completed visits page displayed a message saying no service history was available. The weekly summaries had vanished from his account. Even the billing total was gone. I refreshed the page twice. Then I checked the screenshots on my laptop. Rachel called before I could call Harborway. "I heard you're telling people the portal had final billing records," she said. "Those were temporary scheduling placeholders. Compliance removed them because they were confusing. They had signatures and payment amounts. Test data can contain anything." "Test data charged $8,820? "No one charged, Dad. You saw an internal projection." "Then why did you say the records proved I abandoned him?" Rachel did not answer that question. Instead, she said I was damaging her reputation because I could not admit I had become overwhelmed. By noon, she had called Mark and 2 of Thomas's sisters. Her version was polished. I had misunderstood a training screen, taken unauthorized screenshots, and pressured Thomas into filing a complaint while he was medicated. She said the portal had been cleared because there were no actual visits to dispute. For several hours, it worked. One of Thomas's sisters called him and gently suggested that Mark should manage the complaint. Mark asked me whether the export might also have been temporary data. Even Thomas wondered aloud whether the disappearance meant Harborway had corrected the mistake. I began to feel foolish. Screenshots can be cropped. A spreadsheet can be described as a draft. Rachel worked inside the system. I did not. If Harborway decided to protect its employee, my evidence might look like the confused collection she had already described. Then my laptop chimed. An old email had appeared in the search results because I was looking for the words Care Portal. It was the export confirmation from the night Thomas received temporary access. The message included the export identification number, the exact time the files were created, and a statement that the download represented the account's original service record as of that moment. It also said the export would remain preserved under Harborway's retention policy, even if the family-facing portal changed. Rachel could empty the screen we saw. She could not reach the company's preserved copy. I forwarded the confirmation to the compliance manager with Thomas's signed authorization. I attached the exported files, the appointment card, the urgent care record, the original 2024 consent form, and the 2 versions of my voicemail. My message contained 6 sentences. I did not call Rachel a liar. I did not guess her motive. I asked Harborway to identify who performed the 63 visits and who submitted the completion records. The compliance manager replied that the account had been placed under a formal audit. For the next 5 days, we heard almost nothing. Waiting was harder than gathering evidence. More than once, I started a message offering to handle the matter quietly if Rachel corrected her accusation. Each time, I remembered Thomas's copied signature and deleted the draft. On the 6th morning, Harborway asked us to attend a compliance meeting on June 18th. Thomas could participate by video, but he insisted on going in person. He wore the blue shirt he saved for church and used his walker instead of the wheelchair. "I want Rachel to see that injured is not the same as incapable," he said. Mark drove us. He had not spoken to Rachel for 2 days because she still refused to send him the staffing schedule. The meeting took place in a plain conference room at Harborway's regional office. The compliance manager sat with a regional director and an information systems auditor. Rachel sat opposite them beside a representative from Human Resources. The auditor began with the export identification number from my email. Harborway's server copy matched my files exactly. 63 visits had been created over 21 days. 3 visits appeared each day. All had been billed at $140 for a total of $8,820. All used the same stored image of Thomas's signature taken from the 2024 consent form. Then the auditor displayed the device code. HWC17 was assigned to a Harborway tablet issued to Rachel. The tablet had submitted every check-in. It had also verified every completion note and approved each visit for billing. Location data placed the device at the Harborway branch office for most of the submissions, not at our house. Rachel looked at the table. The regional director asked whether another employee could have used her tablet. It was kept in the scheduling office, Rachel said. People borrowed it. The auditor opened a second record. Every batch had been approved using Rachel's individual access code. The code required a new entry after the tablet had been idle for 5 minutes. Rachel said staff sometimes knew one another's codes. Who? The director asked. She could not name anyone. The auditor then showed the staffing schedule. No aide had been assigned to Thomas on any of the 63 visits. The employee fields were blank because there had never been employees attached to them. Mark leaned back as if the air had left him. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired. The audit explained what had happened, but not why. The regional director asked Rachel that question. She pressed both palms together. Our branch was short-staffed. That explains a missed visit, he said. It does not explain a completed one. Rachel looked at Thomas. Dad was never without care. Thomas's face changed. Because Eleanor was there. Exactly, Rachel said too quickly. Mom was already doing the tasks. The services were covered. The compliance manager spoke carefully. Mrs. Brooks was not a Harborway employee. She did not agree to provide services on the company's behalf. Rachel's eyes filled. I knew she would do it. She always does. Dad was safe. There it was. Not an accident, not a software problem, an expectation. Rachel explained in pieces. Her branch had missed its service completion target for 2 months. Another failed quota could have triggered a regional review and possible closure. She was afraid she would lose her position. When no aides were available for Thomas, she created the visits to keep the schedule complete. She planned to correct them later. But the branch statistics improved when the visits were counted. The records moved into billing. Correcting them would have exposed the earlier entries, so she kept creating more. 3 false visits became 6, then 12, then 63. Why blame Mom? Mark asked. Rachel wiped her face. Because the clinic was asking why Dad was behind. If I admitted no one had gone, they would contact Harborway. So you said she abandoned him. I panicked. I finally spoke. You prepared that edited voicemail before the conference. Rachel looked at me, and I saw the answer before she gave it. I needed Mark to understand how much pressure I was under. You needed him to believe I had refused care. I knew you would take care of Dad, she said. You have always taken care of everything. For most of my life, I would have heard that as praise. That morning, I heard the part she left unsaid. Because I would take care of everything, she believed she could record the work, collect the credit, and blame me if anyone noticed the difference. Thomas put one hand flat on the table. Do not say Eleanor failed me again, he said. She carried me through every day you marked complete. Rachel began to tell him she had only been trying to protect her team. You protected your numbers, he said. You used her work and my name. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The meeting ended with Harborway placing Rachel on immediate suspension. The regional director said the company would reverse the charges, notify the funding program, and determine restitution and employment consequences after its review. Because Thomas had received no Harborway services, his care plan would be transferred to another office at no cost, while a new assessment was completed. Rachel left before we did. She did not look at me as she passed. In the parking lot, Mark apologized. I should have asked for facts before I asked you to defend yourself. Yes, I said. He looked surprised. Perhaps he expected me to tell him it was all right. I know Rachel is your sister, I continued. I know you wanted to believe her, but you asked me to prove years of care while accepting her accusation in one sentence. I need you to remember that. He nodded. I will. It was not a perfect reconciliation. It was better. It was honest. 2 days later, the regional director came to our home with a written proposal. Harborway offered to repay the full $8,820 to the funding program, cover an independent home care assessment, and provide Thomas with legitimate visits through another branch. There was one condition. The company wanted Thomas and me to sign a statement describing the 63 records as an administrative error discovered during an internal review. The statement did not mention Rachel's device, the copied signature, or the accusation she made at the rehabilitation conference. It included a confidentiality clause covering the settlement. The director said the language would protect client privacy and spare our family unnecessary attention. Would it remain in Rachel's employment record that she created the visits? I asked. He said personnel decisions were confidential. Would Harborway correct the information given to the clinic? He said the billing correction would be sent through official channels. That is not what I asked. My daughter told the rehabilitation team that I abandoned Thomas. Will your statement correct that? The director looked down at the document. This agreement addresses the service records. The service records were used to support her accusation. He reminded me that a private resolution could reduce stress for everyone, including our grandchildren. That argument almost worked. I had used family peace to silence myself for years. I looked at Thomas. He read the statement once more, then slid it back across the table. My wife is not signing away the truth so your paperwork can look cleaner, he said. The director turned to me. I will sign a factual correction, I said. I will not sign something that calls deliberate records an error and leaves Rachel's accusation standing. He gathered the papers without arguing. Harborway still had to reverse the charges and report the audit findings. Refusing the settlement did not give us money or revenge. It gave us the right to describe what had happened accurately. That evening, Rachel sent me a message. You chose humiliation over your own daughter. I read it twice. Then I replied, you accused me publicly to conceal what you did. Correct that accusation publicly. After that, we can discuss what relationship is possible. She did not answer for 9 days. During those 9 days, Harborway completed its employment review. Rachel lost her position. The company placed her in a restitution program for the falsified charges and required her to cooperate with the funding correction. The regional office also reviewed other accounts from her branch. We were told only that our complaint had led to broader safeguards. We did not ask for details that did not belong to us. Rachel's children stayed with their father that week. I missed them, but I did not call secretly or ask Mark to carry messages. On the 10th morning, Rachel asked if she could come to the house with Mark present. Thomas and I agreed. We set the meeting for Saturday afternoon. Mark sat beside Rachel on the sofa. Thomas used his armchair. I remained across from them at the dining table where the index cards had once covered the surface. Rachel had written something on a sheet of paper. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. She began by saying she had been afraid of losing her job. I stopped her. Start with what you said about me. She looked up. For a second, anger flashed across her face. Then it passed. I told the rehabilitation team and our family that Mom abandoned Dad after his injury, she said. That was false. Mom provided his daily care. No Harborway aide completed the 63 visits in the portal. I created those entries, used Dad's stored signature, and edited Mom's voicemail to make it sound as though she refused to help. No one spoke when she finished. Rachel turned to me. I am sorry. I believe she was sorry. I did not yet know whether she was sorry for the harm, the consequences, or both. An apology can be sincere and still be only the beginning. Thank you for correcting it, I said. She asked whether she could bring the children for dinner the following Sunday as we had always done. Not yet. Her face tightened. What else do you want from me? Time. Honesty. No access to your father's medical or financial accounts. No private version of this story told to the children or anyone else. If you are angry with me, say it to me. Do not turn it into evidence that I harmed someone. Rachel looked at Thomas. He nodded. Those are my conditions too. Mark offered to help coordinate family visits for a while. I agreed, as long as Thomas and I made the decisions about our home. Rachel folded the paper again. So you forgive Mark, but not me. Mark believed a lie, I said. You built it. The paths back will not be identical. She cried then, quietly this time. I did not move across the room to stop her tears. I had spent too many years treating her discomfort as an emergency and my own pain as something that could wait. When Rachel left, there was no embrace at the door. There was also no final declaration that she was no longer our daughter. We had not chosen revenge. We had chosen a narrow road that required her to walk rather than be carried. 3 weeks later, the doorbell rang at 8:55 on a Monday morning. A home care aide from Harborway's neighboring office stood on the porch with an identification badge and a folder. She introduced herself to Thomas, asked permission before entering, and showed us the care plan before touching the tablet in her bag. The visit was scheduled for 9. She arrived 5 minutes early. She helped Thomas practice the movement his therapist had assigned, watched him use the walker, and asked him to rate his pain. I remained nearby but did not do her work for her. When the hour ended, she reviewed every note with Thomas. Then she handed him the tablet. "Please sign only if this is what happened today," she said. Thomas read the entry. He signed with a small tremor that had appeared after surgery. The line was uneven and entirely his. A moment later, the care app sent a notice. 1 visit completed. Not 3, not 63. 1 real person had entered our home and provided 1 real hour of care. Rachel and I were speaking once a week by then. The conversations were short. She had begun making restitution payments and meeting with an employment counselor. Some weeks, she sounded accountable. Other weeks, she sounded as though she was waiting for us to declare the consequences finished. I did not argue her into understanding. I watched what she did. Love did not require me to erase what happened. It required me to stop helping the harm continue. Thomas's recovery improved slowly. Mark came by on Tuesdays and asked what we needed instead of deciding for us. Rachel eventually visited with the children for 1 hour, with Mark present. She did not touch the care tablet. She did not explain the passed away. That was enough for a first visit, not enough for full trust. Trust would have to be recorded differently from the false visits. It could not be created in batches or copied from an old form. It had to match the time, the work, and the person who was actually there. I still wish Rachel had told me she was afraid before she created the first entry. I wish Thomas and I had spoken sooner instead of protecting the silence around her. But wishing for a gentler history does not change the one we lived. What changed us was the decision to stop calling concealment love. If you were in my place, would you have accepted Harborway's private settlement to protect the family? Or would you have refused until the accusation was corrected? Whatever your answer, remember this: caring for someone does not mean surrendering the truth about what you gave.